Just leave the driving to me, dude. Are you even watching the road?
Slow down!
Whoops.
Hi everyone and welcome back. Today we will compare the three main types of expansion slots for graphics cards that were available in the early 2000s. This clip is an upgraded version of the original that went online sometimes in January this year. The upgrade was required because I rendered the original clip with only 24 frames per second, and I also found a graphics card that was essential for this comparison only 2 days after the original clip went online. So if you have seen this clip before, you can skip to the Second Sidequest that starts around the 32.5-minute mark. If you haven't seen it, then enjoy the clip and remember to leave a comment. Let's start with the parts. The motherboard is the AsRock AliveDual E-Serial88-2 model. This is an AM2 motherboard supporting DDR2. We have two serial 80A ports next to the memory slots and another two next to the north bridge radiator. In the lower right side, we have two IDE connectors, and to the left there's a floppy connector. The slots we are interested in are the PCI Express, positioned immediately under the north bridge. Further down we have the AGP, and right underneath it there are three PCI slots. They are all placed in the chronological order of their appearance, with the newest on the top. We have the regular 12V 4-pin power connector and a 24-pin power connector. The reason why this motherboard is important is because besides the north bridge placed south of the CPU slot, there's another north bridge placed further down. This is the Enforce 3 that allows for an unrestricted AGP port, unlike many other motherboards from this era, where the AGP was actually a PCI slot. In the backplate area we have the PS2 connectors, a serial, parallel, an external serial 80A connector, 4 USBs, 1 Ethernet, and 7.1 audio. The CPU is the Athlon X2 5600 Plus, running at 2.9 GHz. The RAM is a generic 512MB module DDR2, running at 533 MHz. We are not picking the fastest parts, as the motherboard was launched in 2007 and the CPU in December 2006, and we are benchmarking video cards from 2004, so we don't want to skew the results with a very fast CPU. This is the PCI version of the 6200, and it is made by Zotac, and frankly it's a miracle that somebody actually produced a graphics card for the PCI, as by 2004 the PCI graphics cards were phased out by almost 6 years. This one has DVI and VGA connectors and also an S-Video. The next one is the AGP, also available in 2004. Nvidia was also launching PCI Express versions of this series, and the 7000 series from 2005 would become the last to have an AGP connector. This card also has a VGA, DVI, and an S-Video connector. The PCI Express version is a low-profile graphics card, like the PCI, and like the other three, it only has a radiator without a fan. The DVI and VGA connectors are also there, but this time the S-Video is replaced by a TV out connector. The hard drive is by Western Digital, and it's the 250GB model with an IDE connector. Now let's assemble everything. We start with the CPU and move to the memory modules, and then the IDE connector. Next we add the power supply connectors, and then the CPU radiator that is pretty standard. We continue with the graphics cards, and we start by adding the PCI Express card first. Then we add the AGP card, and we complete the build by adding the PCI last. Let's move to Windows and see what GPU-Z has to say about the cards. Unfortunately, the PCI card, although it gets picked, some information is not displayed, like the graphics card is disabled or driverless. But we will inspect it as a standalone card a bit later. We can also use the CPU-Z utility to confirm our GPU-Z findings. We can see that no two cards have the same core or memory speed, and the PCI version has even double the memory capacity. Let's look at it now in more detail as a standalone card with the PCI Express and the AGP graphics cards removed. And we get all the information we need. One important thing to consider is that the PCI Express version has turbo cache, where the graphics card can expand its memory by grabbing RAM from the system. In order to see how much memory the graphics card is using, we can go to the Adapter tab. In this case, it only uses its own memory, but there are some games and benchmarks coming up, and we need to disable the turbo cache, so it won't influence the results. To do this, we use Riva Tuner and navigate to Power User, and under the System node, we find the entry RM Disable Render to System, and we set it to 1, and this will disable the turbo cache. Another very useful thing about Riva Tuner is that it allows us to perform overclock on the fly for the GPU and graphics memory. But sometimes getting the right value can be a bit tedious, and we can adjust the value from the keyboard. This is the XFX 6200 AGP with 256 MB of DDR2 graphics memory that has the regular DVI, S-Video and VGA connectors, and it's also a small form factor like the PCI Express and the PCI that also have DDR2. It will replace the Palit. And now that all three cards align, we can fit a fan over the three and use them all at once without the fear of overheating. From GPU-Z, we can see that the XFX has the same core frequency as the Palit AGP, but it's still 50 MHz down from the PCI Express card. But at least the memory frequency aligns with the other DDR2 graphics cards. Let's go to the updated benchmarks. The 3D mark on stock frequencies is no surprise. The only surprise here is how close the AGP and the PCI cards are. The DDR1 card trails behind, but it's understandable considering the RAM frequency. Still, it's faster than the PCI, despite having only half the amount of RAM. Then we use Riva Tuner to get them to the same frequency, except for the XFX card that becomes unstable as soon as I touch any of the frequencies. I suspect that some capacitors need replacing. And the AGP shines through. But this happens because 255 is a really high value for DDR1 and a modest one for DDR2. The last test we look at for 3D Mark 2001 is trying to get equal score, and it's again the AGP card that has the lowest frequencies. We move to 3D Mark 2003, and this time the stock AGP and PCI Express cards are pretty close to each other, and the PCI is almost 20% slower. Using the same frequencies, we again have the AGP pushing ahead. Aquamark 3 shows similar results to 3D Mark, both for default and same frequency tests. Starting with the game's benchmarks, we only look at stock frequencies, and Farcry in high details only looks suitable for PCI Express and AGP in 640x480 or 800x600. Not presented here is the benchmark for low settings, where every card gets over 30 frames per second, even the PCI in 1024x768. For Doom 3, the high settings graphical preset is too much for any graphics card, and although the PCI and AGP get over 30 frames per second in 640x480, the game lags in crowded areas. The medium preset gets a bit better, and we can use the PCI Express card in 800x600. The scores for the low preset don't get much better than the medium, but at least we can notice, as the resolution increases, that the PCI card recovers some lost ground. Anyway, neither of the four graphics cards can be really recommended for playing Doom 3. Quake 3 Arena is an older game, and for every demo we tried, in any resolution, the cards were able to sustain at least 60 frames per second. We can notice steep drops for the PCI in the low resolutions, where the PCI Express and the AGP card can push almost 300 frames per second, but the drop is less noticeable as we increase the resolution. For the games section, we will continue with the PCI card, as it is the slowest but has the potential to be used with many more motherboards than any of the other cards. For this we will start with a game from 2004 and step 1 year back until 1998, in order to see where it's able to sustain a smooth gameplay with its budget GPU. We start with Warhammer 40k Dawn of War, running in 1024x768, with almost all graphics options set to low. And the game plays pretty smoothly for a game launched in the same year as this budget graphics card. And the fact that this is a real-time strategy also helps making it less noticeable when the frame rate drops.
Has been destroyed. Excellent. The point is now protected from an orc retaliation. We should continue to build listening posts on all our captured points. We must not forget our power needs. Building a plasma generator will supply us with the power we need to keep our force going.
Build routine 721 initiated.
Just leave the driving to me, dude. Are you even watching the road?
Slow down!
Whoops.
Careful, I bruise easily.
Beating you, bum.
Ow! I lost my buzz. spill my pudding. Bogus!
Eat asphalt eaters. My butt hurts.
That totally rocked. Ow! I broke something. Ooh, that's a breakdown.
Ugh, my butt hurts.
Watch it, buddy.
It felt unjust to speak over the excellent soundtrack of Simpsons Hit and Run. The game ran in 1024x768, and as good as the sound was, it was equally bad when playing it. And it came down to three factors: a budget graphics card, some delay added by my capture card, and the lack of any other options to reduce the graphics besides the resolution. Running the game in 800x600 should be fine. The game we are currently looking at is Morrowind, running in 1024x768 with max settings, and although the game maintains a steady 30 frames per second, there are some areas where it lags noticeable.
Why walk when you can ride?
From 2001, we have Colin McRae Rally 2.0, and this one plays great with the highest preset for graphics, so it looks like 3 years is the interval where our budget card from 2004 is able to max out the settings in the games. Counter-Strike is next, and oddly enough this looks like a step back. The card is not able to maintain a steady 30 frames per second. Lowering the resolution to 800x600 should do the trick. As pointed out by CPT Kruj in the original clip, the frame rate is way too low for 1999's Unreal Tournament running in 1024x768, and investigating the issue, I found out that the game was running in software mode. Quickly changing the renderer, we get well over 100 frames per second in DirectX. The original clip is on the right side.
Killing spree.
1998's Half-Life is as smooth as can be and completes our 7-year journey with the conclusion that the PCI card shines starting with the year 2001, and any game released before this date can be played with max settings in 1024x768 or more. There was another question raised by Raptor 9600. Since the year of this demo only aligns with the motherboard and the CPU, we are going to target only 800x600, and the system is auto-detected to low. The game sees some heavy lag with all sort of graphical anomalies on the screen, especially rocks appearing out of nowhere. Once we reach the trees, the frame rate drops to under 10 frames per second.
Prophet, this is Aztec. You copy? I read you. Give a sit rep. Something took a swipe at me on the way down. Oh, I'm caught up in the trees. Okay, Aztec. Hang tight. Help's on the way.
No man, up here. Come on, let's get to Aztec.
Prophet, I'm not alone out here. What have you got, Aztec? KPA, 4-man patrol. Have you been compromised? Negative, but they're close. Wait, something's...
Overall, I can say that the 6200 PCI version runs the game, but it's rather terrible to play like this. Since our PCI card could be used in a wide range of computers, starting with a 486 and ending about a decade ago, it's most likely that it will be used for a retro project. Using it for a retro project, it would be important to evaluate its performance in another popular API besides DirectX and OpenGL. For this we will install nGlide that will allow us to play games intended for 3DFX hardware. Let's start with Metal Fatigue, released in 2000 and playing in 1024x768 with the Glide API selected.
Combat construction possible. Battle in orbit. Build complete. Combat Combat part completed.
Unreal Tournament from 1999, running in 1024 by 768 is smooth as butter.
First Blood.
This is Screamer 4x4 that unfortunately is unable to get the input from the keyboard if Afterburner is started. We only managed to capture a short interval where the frame rate looks good, but we have already seen that the game plays with no issues. The last game we look at in this section is Quake GL that stays constantly over 100 frames per second. Using nGlide, I am happy to say that not only the games look great and could be played in higher than usual resolutions, and also the frame rate was very good, and we could use Afterburner to measure the performance. Now that the games have completed their run, we can safely assume that this GPU was never meant for speed. In 3D Mark, the PCI Express card is the fastest, but the AGP DDR2 XFX card is really close despite having a slower core by 50 MHz. The other AGP card, here in grey, comes in third despite being the only one having DDR1, and this goes to show that the PCI version, although having the faster memory, is bottlenecked by the PCI slot and it's not able to use its full potential. But the loss is not that great. Considering 3D Mark's score, I appreciate it to be somewhere around 10 to 20%. Using Riva Tuner to bring all three graphics cards to the same frequency makes the AGP switch scores with the PCI Express, but this is also due to the fact that DDR1 are pushed to DDR2 speeds. The PCI version cannot be overclocked, even the lowest increase in frequency yields lower scores or errors or the inability to complete the tests. My guess is that the PCI slot is fairly limiting not only in bandwidth, but with voltage as well. When it comes to games, the differences between PCI Express AGP and the PCI can increase to almost 60% in lower resolutions, but they will decrease gradually as we increase the resolution. We would not recommend this card to anyone looking to play games launched in 2002 or later. But for any game launched in 2001 or earlier, this card offers a pretty decent alternative. For the PCI version, you should be aware of some limitations that can occur, as the PCI slot is slower in transfer rate, being connected to the south bridge rather than the north bridge, as with the other two we have seen today. Except for 2 or 3 other graphics cards from Zotac, this card makes the top 5 fastest PCI cards, and you can probably find Windows 98 drivers for it as well. Also, this may be the last GPU where the PCI version of the card can get so close to the AGP or the PCI Express, as further GPUs will be faster and the PCI Express cards will keep increasing the difference due to their larger bandwidth of the slot. And also AGP is 1 generation away from being extinct, and we can no longer measure its performance, although some people speculate that the AGP bandwidth was still capable of supporting an extra generation or 2. All of the cards we tested today are passively cooled, and they can get hot if you don't point a fan towards them. Having a graphics card with such an enduring connector like the PCI, I think it may find its way into a retro computer. But this isn't a must. It's just a modest GPU that was aimed at the budget gamers or people not having other graphics ports such as the AGP or the PCI Express. I can recommend this card for retro games around 2000-2001, but be aware that it also requires a decent CPU to get some performance out of it. The tests today revealed an interesting thing. The AGP version doesn't look any worse than the PCI Express version, but I think that further investigating this motherboard with similar specification graphics cards would be ideal, especially since this is one of the few motherboards that actually fully implements AGP together with PCI Express, and the test today wasn't 100% conclusive. Now let's try to make the test conclusive. For this we're upgrading the CPU to a Phenom 2 X4 965, and we're going to add some heat stopping power in the form of the Thermalright Ultra. We're also upgrading the RAM to the OCZ Reaper. First we're going to add the PCI Express version of the Radeon HD 3850, and we're going to follow up with the AGP version. The difference between them is that the AGP slot can only provide 48 watts of power, and it needs an 8-pin power connector, compared to the 6-pin power connector for the PCI Express slot. Using both of the cards at the same time is a bad idea, as the AGP card gets really hot when the PCI Express is set as primary. So all of the tests are done using just one card. I didn't encounter this particular heating problem for the 6200, where I was able to benchmark with all 3 cards at the same time by setting the priority, so it probably comes down to the additional power supplied to the graphics card. As you can see, the AGP card has the edge, but it also has the frequency. I can't stress enough the good practice of not using 2 3850 at the same time, but curiosity and being reassured by using multiple 6200 at the same time that this will work, it pushed me to try to get benchmark results using both of them, and I managed to lose the PCI Express card, but not before getting the benchmark results by running it in single mode. Trying to get them to the same frequency means an almost 20% push for the memories in the PCI Express card, and it yielded only a 1% increase in the result of the 3D Mark 2001. This is the moment I lost the PCI Express card, and the overclock could also be responsible for losing the card. But by the looks of it, the AGP card still had the edge, at least in 3D Mark 2001. Next we are going to use two Gainward 7900 GS, and apart from the PCI Express card sucking heat out of the AGP card, I'm happy to report that you can use both of them to do benchmarks. At least I haven't broken any of them in order to complete the tests. But you should be aware that the AGP card has double the amount of memory the PCI Express has. In the end, the PCI Express wins some rounds and the AGP wins other rounds, but overall I would say that they are evenly matched. Let's put it all together and have a look at what both ATI and NVIDIA had to offer as the last AGP cards. From the looks of it, the AGP version of the card can match the performance of the PCI Express card, unlike the 6200 PCI we've seen earlier. That was lagging because it was saturating the bandwidth of the PCI slot. We can surely say that the AGP slot is definitely not bottlenecking the cards, and these cards can be exploited at their full potential. We can also say that the exorbitant prices for the AGP cards can be mitigated by buying the PCI Express version, and you will get the exact same performance. Now let's come back to the ASRock motherboard and its one-of-a-kind implementation of both PCI Express and AGP. ASRock's engineers have picked the ULI M1695 for the PCI Express and managed to link it with the aging nForce 3 in order to have full AGP support. The specifications on the website say that it has an nForce 3 as the south bridge, but make no mistake, this is also a north bridge. This may raise concerns, as the information from the nForce 3 north bridge has a longer path to travel in order to reach the CPU. Let's take a look at another motherboard, the ASRock AM2 nForce 3, that links the nForce 3 directly to the CPU. Using the same Phenom 2 X4 and the same memory modules, we get pretty similar scores, with a minor advantage for the AM2 nForce 3. To be completely fair, when I first ran the benchmarks on the AM2 nForce 3, in some cases I got almost 50% lower scores, but after a closer look, in the BIOS I noticed that the fast writes and the sideband addressing were disabled. Let's see the results for both of these cases. This leaves us with two questions. Which one of the two ASRocks is better, the AliveDual or the AM2 nForce 3? My pick is the AM2 nForce 3 because you can overclock the CPU and keep the AGP frequency at 66 MHz, an option that is not there for the AliveDual. Instead, the AliveDual only has control for the PCI Express frequency. The second question is the eternal: Will it run Crysis? And we're back with the AliveDual and the AGP 7900GS, and the game auto-detects the system to medium specifications. And at the start we get around 25 to 30 frames per second, that will drop into the low 20s as we hit the jungle.
Prophet, this is Aztec. You copy? I read you. Give a sit rep. Something took a swipe at me on the way down. I'm caught up in the trees. Okay, Aztec. Hang tight. Help's on the way.
No man, up here. Come on, let's get to Aztec.
Prophet, I'm not alone out here. What have you got, Aztec? KPA, 4-man patrol. Have you been compromised? Negative. But they're close. Wait, something's... Aztec, talk to me! Madre Santísima! Aztec, sound off now! No te mire mal! No te mire mal! No te mire mal! Prophet, help me! No man, Jester, get to him now! Go! Go!
Using the 3850 AGP, the game auto-detects the specification to high and the experience is much smoother, and we get around 35 to 40 frames per second at the start, that will drop into the 30s in the jungle area.
Incoming fire! Here's mine!
Energy critical. Prophet, this is Aztec. You copy? I read you. Give a sit rep. Something took a swipe at me on the way down. I'm caught up in the trees. Okay, Aztec. Hang tight. Help's on the way.
No man, up here. Come on, let's get to Aztec.
Prophet, I'm not alone out here. What have you got, Aztec? KPA.
Thank you for watching and see you next time.